I think the biggest problem for reform or issue for reform, everywhere we're trying to balance the concerns of public safety and individual rights. And in Japan, they had a balance. Compared to the US, prosecutors in Japan traditionally lacked certain tools of investigation that are noted here. There was no plea bargaining system, no immunity, no wiretaps, no undercover operations. But then defendants also in practice found it difficult to avoid detention and interrogation and pressure for confessions. And there's been kind of gradual evolutionary reform on both sides. And my non-expert sense is that they're trying to reform while keeping this balance and not disrupting things too radically. In response to all this recent criticism from Ghosn and the Western media, Japanese Ministry of Justice on their website often defends themselves by citing constitutional provisions. And if you look at the Japanese Constitution, they seem to have all the defendants' rights covered relatively thoroughly. I think it's worth mentioning, though, that there is some difference between the constitutional provisions in actual practice or interpretation of them in actual practice. To give just a few examples, right to silence, the Constitution says no person shall be compelled to testify against himself. A Supreme Court decision in 1999 says that the defendant can remain silent, but has a duty to submit to questioning. And requiring your presence at questioning does not deprive you of your right against self-incrimination. The Constitution says that you cannot admit a confession and evidence inter alia if it occurs after a prolonged arrest or detention. That's like, I guess, like a speedy trial in the US. What is prolonged detention? There are cases where 6 months detention is okay, and it's not prolonged. The Ghosn case is atypical, as I mentioned. Usually defendants will say things may have happened, but I had no intent or knowledge of what was going on. Ghosn only says, well, nothing happened, and it's all a plot against. So for all these reasons listed here, lengthy pretrial detention, a real flight risk, as we certainly found after the fact, Ghosn would not even give his side of the story, what he thought the facts were. And also because of the amounts of money involved, $140 million in compensation and retirement benefits, and 2 more serious counts. Who knows if he would have got jail time, which would have been very rare in white-collar cases in Japan. And we also don't know because Ghosn, other than denying everything, didn't really defend himself, and instead, I guess was successful, at least to some extent, in shifting the focus on the Japanese criminal justice system itself. Was he successful in that effort? I guess to some extent he was, although I think he lost some goodwill in the Western media when he fled to Lebanon. He also lost his $140 million in compensation and forfeited $13 million in bail when he fled. So I guess it's something of a high price for freedom. There was an ongoing investigation in France, and I expect that he may be indicted there as well. I don't know for sure, but they have most of the same information that the Japanese prosecutors had. So we may get a chance to see if Mr. Ghosn thinks that the French criminal justice system is a real justice system that should be respected, unlike the one in Japan. So here are my very tentative conclusions. I think the bright side of the Japanese system, the rehabilitation, reintegration, is real. The results are good. Hard to know what the exact relationship or causal relationship is, but Japan has among the world's lowest rates of crime, incarceration, recidivism, gun ownership across the board. In contrast to the US, I don't see how you could call a Japanese system a failure in that sense. One of the problems at the moment is that jails are emptying out as the crime rate continues to decline. So there's some question whether they can get enough budget at the Ministry of Justice to maintain the jails adequately. As for the Ghosn case, being an optimist, I try to look at the positive, and I wonder if the highlight or attention that the Ghosn case caused on some of the shortcomings of the Japanese criminal justice system may help spur reform, and only time will tell on that. Unsurprisingly, as in any comparison, there are similarities and differences. I still think that the fundamental issues tend to be similar in democratic societies, and when you have to process a large number of cases with limited resources. And the methods are different, but they both share the common potential problem of coercion. And of course, apples to apples, good comparisons are wonderful, sometimes challenging to achieve, but I'm still trying to follow Jerry's advice from 45 years ago about don't compare my theory to your practice.